Tomorrow, the Senate Intelligence Committee will hold their annual Worldwide Threats hearing. We sat down for a bipartisan conversation with chairs Mark Warner and Marco Rubio Thursday, just before the State of the Union address, to discuss some of the challenges facing America today. Through the U.S. national security lens, how concerned are you about the rising risk to U.S. interests in the Middle East because of the close alliance with Israel's war in Gaza?
I think it's a mistake to view October 7th simply through the lens of the Palestinian-Israeli question. I think the reason why Hamas was armed, equipped, and felt the confidence is this broader narrative, this broader objective that Iran has to drive the U.S. out of the region. It is why they're conducting attacks in Iraq and Syria. They want a U.S. troop presence out of the region completely.
Should it stay? Huh? Do you believe that those 2,500 troops in the region should stay?
I do, and the reason why I believe that is because they are not only there on a counter-ISIS mission, let's not forget that group is still existing and is still a threat, but because they sit, the reason why Iran wants us out of there is that we are stationed at key points that tie Damascus and Baghdad and all these supply routes that Iran wants to dominate. If we were gone, these proxy groups would now be at the border of Jordan, be able to threaten Jordan and ultimately threaten Israel as a result. But I am concerned. I mean, whether it's Hezbollah and up in the north of Israel, whether it's what's happening in Gaza, whether it's what's happening with Yemen, the risk of conflict is very real. It's a dangerous and tenuous situation. There's no doubt about it.
President Biden is reviewing whether to keep those troops in Iraq.
Yeah, and I'll be anxious to see what he says. I do think, though.
Do you think they should stay?
I think, in terms of the current basis, yes.
President Biden wants to establish a port in Gaza to try to bring humanitarian aid in. It's not exactly clear the cost, the U.S. military role. Do you think that is a good decision?
The United States has been the largest single donor to humanitarian efforts for years in the region. And I think it is important that we continue to show that. I mean, the airlift approach is more symbolic than actually getting relief to most folks. I think the right thing to do in terms of, particularly as we go into Ramadan, hopefully lowering some of the tension, but also shows America's concern for some of the humanitarian costs in the region.
I would just add one thing to this, and that is it's important to understand why everybody's in favor of helping innocent civilians who are caught in the crossfire of any conflict. I think it's important to understand the reason why aid can't get to them. Hamas has built this system of tunnels. It's expensive. I mean, I don't care if they got a great deal on the concrete. It's expensive to build this extensive system of tunnels. Millions of dollars. That's money that could have gone to create an economy, to feed people, to build hospitals and serve civilians. They didn't do it. And there's real concern, and I think very legitimate reason to believe, that any aid that goes in there will be grabbed by Hamas, used for their purposes, at the expense of the civilian population. Hamas has a track record of zero when it comes to caring about the lives of civilians or of society in general.
You know that the U.S. Ambassador, David Satterfield, who's handling that, has said in written letters to Congress that they have no evidence that Hamas is stealing the aid, certainly not defending Hamas at all, but saying that aid can continue to be pushed into Gaza without Hamas stealing it.
I'll just respond personally. I don't know what he's talking about, because how does Hamas get food? Hamas does not have an economy. Everything Hamas gets comes from abroad, from Iranians and from what they take. I think that the evidence is in place that they have existed as an organization without any means of generating revenue other than what they are able to capture from others. That's just common sense.
Sure, but in terms of now, with the aid getting in now.
I think the food and water and other relief aid, I think it is, you've got to make sure you have a distribution system. But I think I agree with Ambassador Satterfield. But let's also step back from them. And this tunnel network, which is close to 500 kilometers, I don't think any of us fully expected that. And they have been able to secure that. The fact that we are 140 days roughly into this invasion, I think most of us, even in the region, thought the Israeli Defense Forces would be able to take out Hamas 140 days in. They've basically taken out only about 35% of the Hamas fighters, and literally have only penetrated less than a third of the tunnel network. We brought in some of our experts to say that if this was us trying to take out this tunnel network, could we do it quicker, more efficiently? And candidly, the answer was maybe we could be a bit faster, but when Hamas is gruesomely holding the hostages to prevent some of the taking out of the tunnels, this is one of the lessons. This, and I think the lesson of drones in Ukraine, are two of the things in terms of military doctrine I think that we're going to have to learn from both of these conflicts.
When Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, says total victory is within reach weeks away, you are not describing total victory within
I have
weeks.
not.
You're saying the impact's
meeting
tiny.
with folks in Israel, in the military community, in the intelligence community. The idea that you're going to eliminate every Hamas fighter, I don't think is a realistic goal.
Mm-hmm. And you agree with that?
Well, I think that it is possible to achieve a situation in which Hamas does not have the capability to do what they did on October 7th. That doesn't mean Hezbollah doesn't step in and take over now as a result. That doesn't mean that a new Hamas offshoot wouldn't be created. This is an ongoing challenge. And at the end, the head of this entire snake is the Iranian regime. They are the ones that provide the weaponry and the funds. There's no Hamas fighters starving to death. There's no Hamas leaders starving to death. They're all fed, they all have medical care, and they all have all the assistance they need to continue to do the things they do.
And we'll be back in 1 minute with more of our conversation. Stay with us. We asked the senators what the greatest national security threat facing our country is, and there was quite a list. But in terms of the long-term challenge, both agreed it's China. Last year, you told me technology competition with China is the issue of our time. How far ahead is the U.S. versus China in AI?
One of the things that Senator Rubio and I have done on a bipartisan basis is try to go industry by industry in America and warn them of the potential theft of intellectual property, $500 billion a year, the fact that China is investing in quantum computing, in bio, a lot of our time spending on bioengineering and activities China's taking. I think we need to compete against that. On AI, it's a little bit, I believe, a little bit of a better story. You know, a couple years back when we thought the country that had the most data and the most compute and the most engineers might purely win, that's not proven to be the case. The vast majority of innovation is still taking place in this country. If you look at all of the major AI companies, they're virtually all American. I don't underestimate China, but we have that innovative economy that frankly still benefits with us. And frankly, the Chinese regime is reluctant to allow these large language models to be used by their population because frankly, they might find the truth about what the regime has done all the way back to Tiananmen Square in 1989.
There are reports that China lags the U.S. by about a year. Is that consistent with what you've
I don't know how to
briefed?
characterize the time frame, but I would say that's not really the issue per se. First of all, we're clearly, I think, ahead simply because they steal our stuff. We're not interested in stealing their stuff. So there's a reason why they want our stuff, because it's better. I think the bigger concern is how it would be utilized.
China's ramping up its military spending.
Absolutely.
Senator Rubio, you recently voted against the National Security Supplemental that would have sent $5 billion to the Indo-Pacific and to help Taiwan. Why do you think that money can wait?
Well, I don't think it should wait. I just don't think it should be held hostage on the issue of whether or not we're going to deal with our border.
You are saying that the aid to Taiwan is being held hostage to the border, but you are saying the border needs to be handled first.
If we would have done a bill that would have voted for the money to Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific and money to Israel, I would have voted for that. But they want Ukraine in exchange for the border, and the same way they're holding Israel funding hostage. They won't do Israel funding without Ukraine. And I support helping Ukraine. But I believe that our national security begins in our own country, at our border, where today you have thousands of people a day walking into the country, many of whom we do not know who they are. That has to be a priority. And
How do you get aid to deal with Taiwan now?
Let's vote for it. Let's put up a bill that votes on Taiwan.
You're saying it has to be a standalone?
No, it doesn't
$5
have to
billion.
be. I mean, if the president tonight at the State of the Union, I know we're taping this, and he announces that he's going to put back in place the policies that allowed us to detain single adults until their removal proceedings were done, I'll vote for that. I'll vote for that.
It requires a lot of funding, you know that.
It doesn't require a lot of funding. That's the existing law of the country.
Border Security says it needs more funding, as does ICE.
Let's do the funding for that. But it starts with the executive order, which is what applies our laws, which he refuses to do, because it would require him to admit that Trump was right about the border.
So because
I'm sure Mark agrees with everything I just said.
Well, listen, I just think this.
I think you're gritting your teeth through that.
I would just say this.
Yeah.
The border's a mess.
Yeah.
There are certain things that the president can do.
The president says the border's not secure.
But let's go back to what President Trump said. President Trump said, change the law so I can do more. Mm-hmm. I respectfully believe that what Senator Lankford put forward was as tough a border deal as could get passed in this Congress and even next Congress, because unless there is a 80-member shift one way or the other in either political party. I think politics is the art of the possible. I think it was a good deal, and I agree with Marco. We need to get the money to China and Taiwan. We need to get the money both humanitarian and for Israel. But I think the issue that I've been is most wrapped around is if we walk away from the people of Ukraine at this point, after in the last 2 years, the Ukrainians, with our help and the Europeans' help, at literally the cost of less than 3% of our defense budget, have eliminated 87% of the Russian pre-invasion ground forces, 63% of their tanks, 32% of our armored personnel carriers. If we don't stand by Ukraine right now, the rest of the world should never trust us again. And this notion that these authoritarian nations are watching each other, if people say she is a threat, and if they don't believe that if President Putin is successful in Ukraine, and that will then put NATO and American troops in harm's way, she will take lessons from that. I think there is enormous linkage. If we don't stand by that commitment, then I think this will be a mistake of as historic as some of the mistakes made in advance of World War II.
How do you respond to that?
We have 7.2 million people in this country that have entered over the last 3 years. Some of them, we don't really know who they are. New York just deployed National Guard troops to the street because of a migrant crime wave. I mean, we have a serious problem here at home. And so I think that we have to go to Americans and say, okay, first and foremost, our priority is going to be to deal with our issues here. And all I'm asking is that be made a priority equal to
So if
what
President
we're doing
Biden
around the
tomorrow
world.
said, I'm going to put in an emergency action to,
He's already said he might.
essentially mimic remain in Mexico, you'd say, fine, here's $60 billion for Ukraine?
Sure, that's what I said. That's what I've said from the very beginning. We have a migrant wave that began in mid-January of 2021 because people calculated that if they got here, they were going to be able to stay, and 85 to 90% of them were right.
Right.
And it's drawing more people to come here. It's unsustainable.
I think most Americans, and in fact, polling backs this up, believe that there is an issue that needs to be dealt with in the border, but you are linking them right now.
Sure,
you are.
and no different than the people that are linking Israel aid to Ukraine. Because
Okay,
they won't vote for a standalone Israel bill. They want, unless we do Ukraine. And I'm saying I won't do Ukraine unless we secure America's border.
You, Senator, helped to spearhead an effort with Senator Kaine on a bipartisan basis to prevent any president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO.
Yes.
Did you write that with Donald Trump in mind? Because he's the only president that I can recall who has ever threatened
No,
to
I wrote
withdraw
it.
from NATO.
I wrote it. I can't speak for Senator Kaine. I wrote it with the belief that it's an important alliance. If NATO didn't exist, we'd have to create it. It's one of our strategic strengths that we have in the world because China doesn't have these alliances, for example, and neither do the Russians for that matter, or the Iranians for that matter. But I believe Congress needs to play a role in deciding whether we're going to remove ourselves from that. That said, I will tell you that despite what people may say is rhetoric, because I acknowledge that Donald Trump does not talk like a member of the Council of Foreign Relations on these issues, he actually increased troop levels in Poland, and I saw them. I was there when that happened.
He was trying to draw down from Germany and rotate
increase
into
in
Poland.
Poland.
President Biden reversed that.
And so the point being is that I don't believe Donald Trump will remove us from NATO. I do think he is going to do, admittedly in an unorthodox way, what virtually every American president has done since the onset of NATO, and that is demand that some NATO countries do more.
We'll continue our conversation in a moment, so stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation with Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner and Vice Chair Marco Rubio. If I could.
I'm against it.
I know. You're consistent in that.
We have
but
different.
The Biden campaign joined TikTok.
And I
Senator
said,
Warner.
And I said that sent a pretty darn mixed message because the Biden administration supported my earlier bipartisan legislation that we would lead to a path of potentially banning TikTok, because I believe that TikTok, both controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, both collects data, and as a news source, literally half of young people in America get a lot of their news all from TikTok.
170 million Americans
And the
are on
idea, if you don't think the Chinese Communist Party can twist that algorithm to make it the news that they see reflective of their views, then I don't think you appreciate the nature of the threat. Would the United States ever allow China to buy CBS? I don't think they would. And we might have slightly different ways on how we go at this, but we think this is a national security issue.
The danger in TikTok is not that somebody goes on that video and puts something up that looks stupid or silly. The reason why TikTok is so attractive, its value is it has an algorithm, a recommender engine, which is one of the best in the world. That is owned by ByteDance. Under Chinese law, ByteDance must own it. And the only way that that recommender engine works is if they have access to the data. So it doesn't matter who you sell TikTok to, where they're headquartered, it doesn't even matter where they store the data. As long as ByteDance engineers in China have access to that data, control the algorithm, they have to have access to American data to make it work. And that's what we need to confront. That's the reality here.
You like this House bill?
Listen, I think there's a lot of creativity on TikTok, and I think if they had to disgorge, as long as the algorithm moved, if this was a Brazilian company or a French company or a Canadian company, it wouldn't cause me near the consternation.
I don't know about the how. I haven't read it in detail yet. It's not an easy thing to resolve, but ultimately what we have to focus on is who owns the algorithm, because whoever owns the algorithm will have access to the data.
And manipulating that algorithm
Right.
can mean what kind of information you're going to see. And if you don't think that could be used as the most powerful propaganda tool ever, then I don't think you appreciate it.
In an election year.
In an election year, then you don't get the threat.
You, Senator Warner, said last month that we are less prepared for foreign interference in 2024 than we were in 2020. What exactly are you concerned
We
about?
have nation states, China, Iran, Russia, who know that interfering in our elections is both effective and cheap. We have a lot more Americans who have, for a variety of reasons, less trust in any of our institutions, including our voting system. We have a court case that was in the Fifth Circuit that had restricted the voluntary communication between social media and the FBI or CISA. And you have that cauldron of change going on, and then you throw in artificial intelligence tools that can bring deep fakes or voices or other manipulation at a speed and scale that's unprecedented.
It's the area of malign influence, right? What are the issues that already divide Americans? So let's amplify messages that put them at each other's throat, that makes their politics even more conflictive. We already do a pretty good job of it on our own. Help us do that. And that doesn't just deal with elections. We're beyond just election interference with malign influence. It's now an effort to influence our policy debates, to divide us year-round.
Right.
On a regular basis. Russia does it, and they've done it for a long time. The Chinese want to get into this business. The Iranians and others will join them because, and not just here, we've already seen examples of it in other democratic nations. It's a growing risk, and I think one of the first things we have to do is talk about it so people understand what it is we're trying to describe. It's not hacking ballot boxes. It's hacking the minds and our political debate in this country by exacerbating pre-existing tensions to the point of boiling over.
And it's not clear how people are supposed to protect themselves against what you just described.
Well, it begins with awareness and the understanding that sometimes these messages that are being driven or some of these things that people are putting up online are not real, or they are a video of something that happened halfway around the world 10 years ago, not down the street 1 month ago. But there are things that are designed to get people angry. And you know, the algorithms feed this, because people love content that shows something outrageous, and more people will view it, so it's easy to push this. And before you know it, people are out there voting and at each other's throat over something that may not even be real.
This is the biggest risk for election night?
It's a huge risk. And now, we got a job to do, and I hope others will advance this as well. 20 tech companies said in an agreement in Munich that they would try to put watermarking, and that would indicate if content has been altered or deep fake.
Is that sufficient?
They've said they will take it down, but it's all voluntary. So we need to keep the pressure on. And frankly, I think the administration needs to lean in more. And I think we need to do a better job. I think people were potentially more aware, even 4 years ago under President Trump, do a better job of educating that with these new tools like deep fakes, don't believe everything you see and hear.
Our full conversation with the senators is on our website and our YouTube channel.